I think history might actually be my favorite class now, which is surprising because I'm pretty sure it's my lowest grade, except chemistry is worse. So it's not my lowest grade, but it's a pretty low grade that I'm generally not like the best at necessarily, but it's now one of my favorite classes. And I say now because generally I don't care about history in the fact that most things you learn in there are kind of, in my opinion, not the most interesting stuff, but history, in my opinion, would still be more interesting over like something like science or freaking English because it's history. It is technically just like storytelling. They're just like explaining things that happened in the past and, you know, cause and effect and like blah, blah, blah. But in the end, history is relatively interesting in most cases, but I'm still usually not paying that much attention. But when she goes into topics about China, this is when I get interested. This is the only point in history class that I will ever pay attention because I'm of Chinese origin, and I figured I may as well start paying attention. And originally, I didn't really care that much about China, like a while back, but then I figured, you know, why not be very patriotic and start caring about my country? And then that was kind of a joke, but now it's not a joke anymore because I figured, why not actually care about your country? Because everyone should be proud of their ethnicity, country of origin, and all that crap. That's how diversity comes together and the dream, American dream or some crap, I don't know. But everyone should be proud of their ethnicity and crap and background. So I do like learning about China anyways, regardless of whatever opinion on that, just because, you know, that portion of history seems more appealing to me, and it actually somewhat pertains to me. But we recently learned in history class about a point in China called the Century of Humiliation, which is essentially China's lowest point, like, ever. I'm not 100% sure if it's, like, its lowest point ever, but, like, it's, like, a pretty low point in China's history. And, basically, it was like a point where they were kind of struggling in terms of like world power, which has obviously changed now because now I'm pretty sure they're like #2 in the world. They're closely rising up to the US as everything goes to crap, and then you know, that's all, you know, modern world crap. So like I don't want to get into like modern freaking present day foreign policy politics or crap, so I'm gonna stick to history where like China's history and crap. So the context for China having an all-time low is started like way back in like the European age of like discovering America, Christopher Columbus and all that crap. When Europe sent out explorers to, you know, venture the seven seas, they found cool stuff and got new resources and new land, while China sent absolutely nothing. They sent like one person who came back with a giraffe and like some plants, and then they were like, we're good. We don't need to send out any more explorers. So they stopped sending explorers. So that's their first step wrong. So as Europe continues to develop more resources and power, China's kind of sitting there doing pretty much nothing. And then the second mistake is when like after Europe develops more resources, more land, they decide to industrialize because they kind of enter a somewhat form of peace. So they start like innovating crap. So they start industrialization. That's when they like factories, they urbanization. Everyone moves to the city. Factories started popping up everywhere. Everyone's mass producing crap. They put a bunch of like handmade businesses out of business because, you know, mass production beats like a home business because just in terms of efficiency. And those factories, we learned, were absolutely horrendous. They were like low pay, disgusting, dangerous, child labor, all that good stuff. But China did not implement any of this, at least in history. So China did not industrialize. They did not embrace the Western innovations. So that's their second step, second mistake that they made to further decrease themselves behind the times and kind of just slowly fall off. But eventually, after industrialization, a bunch of European nations start to conquer their neighbors because they're so industrialized, they're so, you know, innovative, technologically innovated, that they need to get more resources, and they happen to be so innovated and like advantageous that they can just like sweep over like a bunch of their neighbors. So Africa gets like relatively conquered. Like mostly conquered. Africa's like taken entirely. That's why there's like a bunch of like republics there. Latin America was like kind of taken advantage of for economic purposes, and then India was definitely swept by the British, and then China was also influenced by Western culture. Now, to focus on China, the first issue was the Opium Wars that we learned about, which is essentially where, I think it was Britain or some Western European country, they started selling opium to China, which is just like this drug, and then the Chinese people got high all the time. So then, when China's heavily under the influence of drugs, the general standard of people kind of just decreases, and that's not very good for the country as a whole. So when everyone is kind of garbage and high on opium all the time, it's noticeably like bad for the country. So to fix this, China told Europe that, like, can you stop selling us bad drugs? And then Europe says, heck no, because if they're selling it and they're buying it, why would they stop? So Europe says like, if you don't want it, if you don't want us to sell it to us, if you don't want us to sell drugs to you, then stop buying it. But they can't do anything about that because the drug addicts are still buying it. So in the end, their final solution is to burn some warehouses containing lots of opium. Just like burn the drugs so they can't have them anymore. But this pisses off Europe, so Europe comes back with the big ships, technologically innovative ships, and they come back declaring war, and that's the Opium Wars. Like quick newsflash, the European technology was so advanced that China just gets completely swept in the Opium Wars because China has been falling off for many years. So when they finally meet technology, the difference in times is just too obvious. So Europe kind of sweeps China in the Opium Wars, and then China's like freaking like ghetto and broke after that. So they have to give up Hong Kong. They have to pay back a bunch of the opium that they destroyed, and then generally they're just extremely weak. And that's the start of the century of humiliation, when all the people of the world look at China like, oh, I thought China was strong. I thought they were like controlling trade, because China in history always had like a bunch of stuff. They had like porcelain, silk, like all that good, expensive, good luxury stuff. But now everyone saw that China is like really weak because they fell off. They did not advance with the times. So Western powers send a bunch of people into China, and they kind of just get swept over and taken over really fast. They get imperialized. That's the word for it. They got conquered. But there was another thing we learned, the Taiping Rebellion. It's kind of like a series of rebellions. I can't remember exactly why they started, but essentially people started rebelling because they saw how crap everything was going on in China. They're like, our country's really falling off, so we're going to rebel, because that's what everyone does when they're not satisfied with their country. They started rebelling, and apparently it was really bad. I heard, according to the notes, it was like 20 to 30 million deaths, which is, if my numbers are correct, that's like 10% of modern-day America, which is a pretty big number. 20 to 30 million is not a light number, but it's a lot of deaths over like a bunch of rebellions that just want to like take power, reform China in some way, because everyone's pissed off, and the country's kind of going downhill anyway, so... At that point, China's continuously falling off. I thought losing the Opium Wars was enough, but no, they keep going down. And then after that, there's like there's like an improvement like phase where they try to industrialize. They realize like, oh frick, we need technological advances like Europe and like the Western powers. So they try to advance with like schools, factories, and like all that good stuff, but they fail because apparently there was some empress at the time who was like really conservative. So she was like, I reject these Western changes. So she just rejects all this like industrialization and crap. So then they don't industrialize, they can't get the new technology. So boohoo, that's another failed step. And then the last thing we learned was the Boxers' Rebellion, when China got swept and conquered by a bunch of countries. But when you conquer a country, it's not like majority of the population is on your side. There's still a majority of population that hate you, so they only send a few people in. So China tries to fund like these Boxer Rebellion. That's what it's called, the Boxers' Rebellion. They try to fund these little nightclubs. And these little clubs learn to fight. They get people to learn how to fight. And then these people who learn how to fight, their job is to go out and beat the foreigners out of their country. So every European like citizen or like inhabitant of their country will now be beat up by martial arts to get them out of the country. But this isn't really. First of all, it sounds really stupid, because also it's called the Boxers' Rebellion because Europe didn't have a name for martial arts. It's literally just martial arts rebellion. They funded a bunch of martial art clubs to go beat up European people. It sounds really stupid, and it was really stupid because technology advances, so when people have guns, martial arts isn't really effective anymore. But they funded these martial art groups. They went out and started beating people up. So as a result, 8 Western European or Allied powers, as we learned or called it, the 8 Allied powers came together, and they swooped into China and put down these martial art clubs. So they kind of got destroyed because in the end, people have guns, and fists are not a match for guns. So martial arts was not the solution to winning back their independence, and overall, they got destroyed. So essentially, those are the 4 main parts we learned. I'm sure there's other parts that like actual historical people would know about, but generally, I'm sure we only learned about those 4 because there was probably 4 of the relatively most relevant things. And overall, it's just to point out the fact that China, I think it was around the 18th or 19th to 20th century, was the century of humiliation. That was like their all-time low point, when they kind of fell off because they realized Western Europe has actually been developing like crazy amounts, and then they came over how to fight, and they realized firsthand just how strong Europe actually became. But don't worry, after that, I don't know what happens after that because we haven't learned that yet, but I know that modern day China is, you know, better off than it was before. So something happened in between to make China, like, you know, go on the rise. So whatever happened. Whatever the modern day is, present day is now, yeah, whatever happened to get to this point happened. China is back at some sort of pedestal and like back in form of like world power crap. But that's I'll figure that out at some point later. But that's all I really wanted to discuss. The Chinese century of humiliation, China's lowest point like ever in history. It was just an interesting thing that I learned in history. I just wanted to review it, which is essentially just studying for my test. This is my excuse to study. But that's all there is to it.